Today, I want to talk about the secret war happening inside your mind. Do you think of yourself as a completely rational, logical person? Most of us do. But the truth is, that is only part of the story. Inside all of us, there are impulses, memories, fears, and desires we would rather not fully face. And your brain has a very clever way of dealing with them. It uses something called defense mechanisms. The idea was first organized by Sigmund Freud, and later developed much further by his daughter, Anna Freud. Freud said the human mind is like an iceberg. The part you can see above the water is your conscious mind. That is the part you are aware of. But below the surface is a much larger world. That is the unconscious. And buried in that unconscious are things that can be hard to accept. Painful memories, disturbing urges, old wounds, desires that feel shameful, threatening, or socially unacceptable. Here is the problem. Those hidden feelings do not just disappear. At some point, they try to rise back up. And when they do, the ego, the part of you trying to hold everything together, senses danger. So your mind activates an emergency system. That system is called a defense mechanism. Think of it like antivirus software for your psyche. Its job is to reduce anxiety, protect your self-image, and help you keep functioning, even if that means bending reality a little. And that is important. Defense mechanisms are not automatically bad. In fact, every single person uses them. They are part of normal life. The real problem starts when they are overused, or when they distort reality so much that you can no longer see yourself clearly. Let's start with one of the most basic ones: repression. Repression is when your mind pushes painful thoughts or memories out of conscious awareness. For example, someone who went through a terrifying car accident as a child might not be able to remember it at all. That is repression. But here is the thing. Just because a memory is buried does not mean it is gone. It can stay alive in the unconscious. And later, it may show up in dreams, slips of the tongue, strange fears or anxiety that seems to come out of nowhere. Next is projection. And this one is fascinating. Projection is when you accuse someone else of feeling what you secretly feel yourself. In simple terms, it is when you put your own unwanted emotions onto someone else. Maybe you are deeply jealous of someone, but instead of admitting that, you become convinced they are jealous of you. Or maybe you lie often, so you start assuming everyone else is lying too. That is projection. And honestly, once you understand it, you start seeing it everywhere, especially in politics, online arguments, and group conflict. Sometimes people project the parts of themselves they hate onto another group, then use that projection to justify anger, blame, or even cruelty. Then there is rationalization. This is when we come up with a logical-sounding excuse to explain behavior, failure, or disappointment that hurts too much to face directly. You probably know the old fable about the fox and the grapes. The fox cannot reach the grapes, so he decides they were probably sour anyway. That is rationalization. You do not get the promotion, so you tell yourself the company was a mess anyway. Someone does not love you back, so you decide they were not emotionally mature enough for someone like you. In the moment, rationalization protects your pride, but over time, it can keep you from facing reality and growing from it. Another common one is displacement. Displacement is when an emotion gets redirected from its real target to a safer one. Let's say your boss humiliates you at work. You cannot yell at your boss, so you go home and snap at your partner, your kids, or even the dog. The anger is real. It just lands somewhere safer. You see this all the time. A player loses a big game and blames the referee. A person feels powerless in one area of life, so they explode in another. The original source of the emotion is too risky to confront, so the mind picks an easier target. Now here is where it gets interesting. Not all defense mechanisms are destructive. Some can actually be useful. One of the most positive examples is sublimation. Sublimation is when a person takes an impulse that might be unacceptable or dangerous and transforms it into something socially valuable. Someone with intense aggressive energy might become a boxer, a surgeon, or a relentless competitor in sports. Someone with powerful emotional or sexual energy might pour it into art, music, writing, or performance. Freud even suggested that civilization itself may be built on sublimation, that human beings took raw instinct and turned it into culture, science, beauty, and meaning. That idea is kind of amazing, right? Then there is denial. Denial is exactly what it sounds like. It is when reality is too painful, so the mind refuses to fully accept it. A person loses someone they love, and for a while, cannot emotionally grasp that the person is really gone. Someone gets a serious medical diagnosis and acts like nothing is wrong. In the short term, denial can soften a devastating blow. But if it lasts too long, it can make healing and action much harder. Another one is intellectualization. This happens when a person avoids emotional pain by turning everything into analysis. For example, someone facing a life-changing illness may become obsessed with medical research, statistics, and technical details, or after a breakup, someone might talk about the relationship, like they are presenting a psychology report instead of admitting they are heartbroken. The mind does this because thinking can feel safer than feeling. If you can explain it, categorize it, and dissect it, maybe you do not have to fully experience it. Then we have reaction formation. This one is especially strange. Reaction formation is when you behave in the opposite way of what you actually feel. A person may feel strong resentment towards someone, but act excessively kind and warm around them. Someone may feel impulses they do not want to admit, so they become loudly moralistic, rigid, or extreme in the other direction. On the surface, it looks sincere, but underneath, the opposite emotion may be fighting to stay hidden. So what is the core of all of this? What do defense mechanisms really reveal about us? Maybe something uncomfortable. Maybe we are not nearly as honest with ourselves as we think. Maybe a huge part of being human is learning how to survive our own inner conflict. In a way, defense mechanisms are the art of self-deception, but they are also survival tools, because let's be honest, if we had to face every painful truth, every buried impulse, and every emotional wound, all at once, most of us would not function very well. Defense mechanisms act like a psychological anesthetic. They numb the pain just enough to help us get through the day, and sometimes that is exactly what we need. But the danger begins when the anesthetic becomes a lifestyle, when distortion turns into habit, when avoiding the truth feels safer than knowing it. Because the more we rely on defense mechanisms without recognizing them, the harder it becomes to understand ourselves, and the harder it becomes to truly see other people too. And maybe that was Freud's deepest point. Not that defense mechanisms make us weak, but that becoming aware of them is what makes us free. The moment you notice how your mind protects you, you also begin to notice what it is protecting you from, and that is where real self-knowledge begins. Because in the end, freedom is not pretending you have no defenses. It is seeing them clearly enough that they no longer control you.